I recently had the privilege of being in Maui, and it is an incredible landscape, and you could see why an artist would want to live there. But I did not expect the art fair the final day there. And I met Corinne Bauer, and we had the best conversation.
I'm Amy Hallberg, author, editor, and writing mentor. And these are conversations with real life creatives on how we find and embody our voices. Because if you want to be a real life creative, it helps to know what that looks like for you. Welcome to Courageous Wordsmith.
You know, I was trying to describe what it is you do, and it made all the sense in the world why I would be interested in the art that you have. But I'd really rather just let you describe what would a person see if they walked up to your table in the art fair?
Okay. My table definitely stands out. Of course, my items are very tiny, which I think is what drew you to me in the first place. But when you walk up, you see these low, kind of dim little gold lamps and vintage cigar boxes. And as you get closer, you see tiny landscape paintings and little figures that are, some of them are small enough to fit on my thumbnail. So you have all these little paintings displayed in various ways, but one of the showstoppers is a box. It has 36 compartments, each of them holding a painting no bigger than about 2 inches, and that's framed. And then underneath, when you lift up, there is a whole compartment underneath. It's all full of little tiny custom frames. So I coined it the world's tiniest frame shop.
So the question I asked you when I walked up to this was how do you even do that? So like it's all these little delicate landscapes of Hawaii, right? Of Maui,
Yeah.
gorgeous, but like tiny, tiny, tiny and really detailed too. These are not little sketches. They're intricate.
No, they're fully realized landscape paintings, usually between 1 square inch or under, up to maybe 2 by 3 inches is the majority of my work. I just actually recently had to measure some pieces, and one that's a fully detailed landscape, buildings, palm trees, rainbow, beach, water. It is 7/8 by 11/16 of an inch.
Which is ridiculous. Um, and as I told you, I wrote this book called Tiny Altars. I was thinking about dollhouses, right? But I saw this and I was like, my gosh, these literally are little tiny monuments to vast landscapes.
And I think that's kind of what makes them so special is that it's capturing just a huge area, a huge ocean, huge mountains, all in something that's roughly the size of a postage stamp. And which is ridiculous, I realize, also was an unexpected love affair. But it requires so much focus, and I have to hold my breath for pretty much all the details. So I have to kind of work in measured little seconds and
Mm.
then breathe and regroup. And so it's a very detailed work, and almost meditative. I have to be
Mm.
so laser focused to do it that the rest of the world is shut out. Time doesn't exist anymore. Sometimes I'll look up and 4 hours have passed. It'll feel like 15 minutes.
And I just have to ask now that you're saying this. I mean, when I'm writing, I go in, I come back, I deal with it later, I step away. Do you do these all in one sitting or do you come back to a piece again and again?
Most of them I come back to. There are some that I'll finish in one go. But oftentimes I'll end up with a sky that's so beautiful that I'm afraid to ruin it. Or I don't know where to go from there. And so I'll leave it. In fact, I have some sitting right here staring at me that I painted in early 2023.
Mm.
They're kind of stormy sunset skies, and they're so beautiful that I just I'm a little bit paralyzed to keep going. So I stare at them every like couple weeks or, month, or sometimes I'll stare at them every day. And then suddenly I'm like, oh, I know what it needs. And then I can keep going. But oftentimes they sit for months, partially done, while I wait for the rest of the inspirational direction to strike.
I'm so happy to hear you say that because the reason is, I mean, your process is your process, but when I talk with people, it's kind of like we have this perfectionism built into our culture, right? You have to know what you're doing and get it perfect, but also it doesn't have to be just perfect, it has to be amazing, and yet you have to get it right the first time. So I kind of love that you're like, "Yeah, I got these beautiful skies, and now I'm just gonna walk away and let that be for as" what I'm hearing is, as long as it takes, and it sounds to me like the picture tells you what it wants to be when it wants to be that.
Yes. And I mean, honestly, I wish it wasn't this way. I wish I could just be like, ta-da! It's Tuesday at 2. I guess I'm gonna create a masterpiece. It just doesn't. It's so hard. Especially it's highly, highly detailed and it's 1 square inch by 1 1/4. And because here's the thing, there's two sides. Yes, 100%. I kind of have to wait and they tell me what to do. But I think part of the struggle is the perfectionism.
Mm,
It's being afraid to move forward and have that next brush stroke be so imperfect that I can't recover from it. And then I just ruined the sky. You know what
mm,
I mean? So it's a blessing and a curse. It guides the work and then stifles it.
mhm. So, when I saw your stand, the first thing I was drawn to was you had, like, these almost they were like these little metal, almost like lockets. The frames
Yeah.
were like little lockets. So, tell me about those.
So they were actually inspired by a trip to an antique store locally here in Maui. And they had this old piece of art locked in. It was actually a drawing. I was a drawing of ships locked in this antique vintage style frame that's kind of like a locket. This one was bigger. It was probably like 5 by 7 or maybe even a little bit bigger, but it's essentially brass with the glass. So it's like presses it almost like you'd see old vintage pressed flowers in.
Mhm,
And I loved that frame, and I loved that it was the drawing in that vintage frame, and then I was able to actually find them in a 2 by 3 inch size. So
mhm,
they're brass, so they patina over time, which I think just makes them more beautiful as they age. And then I basically sandwich the painting in there, and there's a little ridge on the brass, so it keeps the painting from touching the glass. So it's
right.
a really great archival way to frame it. And there's just something so charming about them, especially hung in little groupings, but they're just so sweet and everyone has fallen in love with them as well.
So there's that, and then, like I said, I was just admiring that, and you're like, "Ooh, but look, here's the best part," and like you said, you picked up the display, and underneath are all these little teeny frames, which you haven't read my book, but in my book, I talk about the dollhouse, and I talk about the little teeny picture frames and the little teeny paintings, and I saw the picture frames, these little wooden frames, and I'm not talking simple, they're ornate, and you can pick any style you want within reason, right? But there's a bunch of choices, you can get just the one you want. Where did that idea come from? It's so delightful.
Oh, thank you. That it's funny, they've all sort of been born a little bit organically along the way. When I first started painting them, they were, just so tiny and ridiculous, and I thought, like, I wonder how cute it would look framed. And actually, the first frames that I found were for dollhouses. They were dollhouse frames. So I got onto Etsy and I did some research and I ordered a first little set of frames. They were very plain, but as soon as I framed one, it just, you know, adorable. And then I started searching and realized I wasn't really finding what I wanted. And so then I ended up contacting some people to see if I could have custom made ones, which I used to source from all over the world. Since then, I have found a source local here on Maui that creates them for me, which is amazing to be able to support another woman owned Maui based business. Plus the shipping, it's nice.
Yeah.
I can just drive over and visit her and pick them up. And then I have some really ornate ones. Those do come from the UK. There's a woman that creates those. And they're interesting because when you photograph them, but even to the naked eye, they look like fully detailed little gilded frames, but they're actually flat. And what they've done is photograph old vintage frames, and then overlay the image onto little tiny wooden frames because they're, like 1.25 by maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches by 1.5 inches. So it would be almost impossible to recreate that detail unless you did it in a mold with resin, which I have thought about. But she creates these vintage style frames. And so it's really fun because it almost makes the piece look like it belongs in a museum.
I have to ask, how did you even think to like, how did this even start? Because it's clear you love this. This is a kind of crazy idea. It
It's
works and people
it's
love it, but
People
how?
love it. So complete accident. So I was an interior designer. This was during COVID, and I had one project that was like a renovation. All my other design work was considered non-essential except for the one project that was under construction because construction was still whatever. So my workload got cut way down, but my stress level shot way up because I'm still trying to kind of manage, I had projects that were underway. So as we rolled into March of 2020, April, May of 2020, of course, I had things lost in shipment. I had companies that had gone out of business. Life was a little bit wild, way more stress, also way more time on my hands. And so I started really leaning into watercolors. And previous to this, I had painted still what most people would consider small, at like 4x6, 5x7.
Mhm.
But I had a friend actually suggest, why don't you try doing something really tiny? Like you like to work small. Why don't you try like a micro small? And my first thought was like, that is ridiculous. That sounds so hard and terrible. And I never want to do that. And it's weird. So I was like, no. This is probably like the end of maybe 2019 that she mentioned this. And I thought, no. And fast forward, I had ordered some new paper and it was a different brand of cotton paper. And so they all have different sizing and coatings and whatever. I had cut down some paper and I had a 1 inch strip. And
Mhm.
because it was a new brand, I thought, well, maybe it'll just be interesting to like see how it takes the paint. So
Mm.
I got one little square wet and I started kind of adding the paint into the wet. And I was like, oh my God, it's kind of looking like a misty forest. So I immediately cut another piece and I thought, screw it. I'm just going to paint one tiny painting. I'm not going to tell my friend. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm just going to try it. And as soon as it was done, it was the weirdest thing because I was like almost emotional. I'm like, why is this so cute? And like, why do I love it so much? I almost felt like I was going to cry. And I just was like, oh my God, it's so sweet. And it was a little couple walking up a road. And it looked like they were looking at each other mid stride, mid conversation, even though they were, about the size of a grain of rice each. It looked
Mhm.
like they were like living a whole life. And I just fell in love with them. And it just looked so like, I don't know, like they took on their own little lives. And I immediately painted another one and was like, oh my God, this might even be cuter than the first one. And then I just became obsessed and started painting all these teeny tiny paintings, never intending to sell them. I mean, frankly, not even really intending to show anyone. Like it was just kind of my own little quiet love affair. And they kept just stacking up. And so I used to have a shelf above my desk. And so I would just kind of lean them against the wall. And I had, like 5 and then 10 and then 15. And then I would paint a new one that was a new favorite. So then I would like take the least favorite. And I had actually, I still have one here, these little hexagon shaped brass and glass display boxes. And I started just putting the paintings in these boxes. And so I would have a display of 5 or 10, and then I would just keep putting them in these little boxes. And the next thing I knew, the boxes were full. And I was like, what a weird little pigeonhole. that I can't seem to get out of. And then I decided to frame one.
Hmm.
And as soon as I framed the first one, it took it to the next level of cuteness. I decided to post them on my business Instagram,
Mm.
thinking that they'll see this attention to detail, be so blown away, and want me to do their house, obviously. But what really happened is people kept reaching out asking to buy them.
We have this idea, I think, about art, like it's supposed to be a certain way. And in our head, we have these conditioned responses that we have to fit, right? And I love how when you made that, you started to want to cry. And I'm curious if this has continued to be true for you. There's the, okay, I'm done for today. Yes, like my brain's like, it's done. But with something lands, it's like this thing wells up in me and I want to dance and I want to sing. It's so emotional and you can't force that.
No, and I'm nodding along with you as you're saying all of this because it is those little things in life that light you up in a different way. And it hit me, it was so unexpected. It
Mhm.
was such an upwelling of emotion that came out of nowhere, because like I said, I thought it's ridiculous.
Mm.
But the response within my body was so powerful that I was like, okay, well, if nothing else, I found my new favorite pastime. I knew that I wasn't going to be stopping doing it anytime soon.
The other thing that's interesting to me is that you had already given yourself permission to be a creative person. And in fact, you're not from Maui, you're transplant. So there's a lot of places where you've already allowed yourself to maybe step out of what is the conditioned expectation of what would be the reasonable thing. Like a reasonable person doesn't move to Maui in the first place. I don't think. Like you vacation there, but you don't move to Maui and just like live there if you're not from there. Like, right, that you don't the reasonable person doesn't make their living from being artistic, I don't think, in our culture, right? So you already
Right.
had passed some of those boundaries where you already knew that you were a creative person. That was actually part of your understanding of yourself. True?
It's funny because I didn't actually view myself as creative. I just thought that I had a really good eye.
Really?
Yeah. Even as a designer, I didn't really think of myself as an artist or artistic. I thought I just had a really good eye. So,
Interesting.
like, I'm not creative, but if you show me three things, I will tell you what the best one is. Like, that's
Right.
more how I viewed it.
So more like a
Um,
spectator.
yeah, honestly. I mean,
Interesting.
looking back when I see the random things that I pulled together in projects that, in fact, I remember having one client where they had a huge house and a huge garage, and it was a friend. So they were like, just ship everything here. And then you can come, once it's all arrived, you can come put the room together. And so they're watching one item at a time. And the husband, who's a massive builder, who's done a million projects, who's worked with designers, is like, what is she doing in here? Like, Connie, I know she's your friend, but like, what is happening? She's got like leather and like rattan, and these colors don't even look like they're maybe going to be whatever. And the room, when it all came together, he was like, it's incredible. Like, it's so beautiful. I can't believe how well this all works. And in my head, I could already see that finished vision,
Mhm.
which this is one really interesting thing. So I am dyslexic.
Mm.
Um, and in addition to not being able to spell, it really blesses you with a very visual mind. Most dyslexic people can hold a 3D object in their mind and even manipulate it. So I could
Interesting.
take like a red box
Mhm.
in my mind's eye and I can rotate it around, I can flip it over, I can make it black or blue or lumpy. And so I could visualize the room, like when you see 3D home modeling where they put everything in and then you see that image,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I can do that in real time, visually, mentally.
Which I just wanna stop on that because this is new information. We did not talk about this beforehand. But I have often thought about how we privilege one kind of giftedness versus another kind, And I think that's not a helpful construction. I think it would be so much more helpful if we looked at each person and said, okay, what's your gift? Let's make room for that gift, because trying to fit everybody, pigeonhole them all into the boxes, you don't get things like Tiny Art Maui.
Exactly. No, and I think that that is such an important point that you're making, because so many things that we consider to be either difficulties or challenges, learning disabilities, we think of them as being a detriment, but
Right.
they're not in a lot of ways. And especially if they could be intervened early on. There's a phenomenal TED talk on dyslexia, which literally changed my life, because he talked about how that brain works and how it has more of an overarching view, and it's able to pull in multiple brain regions
Hmm.
to work on one thought or concept or problem in a way that a neurotypical brain doesn't.
We're going to link to that. So you're going to give me that
Okay,
link
I
because,
will.
yeah,
It's incredible. And it's just, he talks about how if we could intervene in early childhood and be like, you're going to be a director, an entrepreneur, a designer, an artist. Like, you have this skill set that is really primed for these whole host of future professions and interests. But
right,
what we focus on is like, man, Jimmy's really not doing great with the spelling.
right.
And then, like, I felt really dumb growing up
Mhm,
because I struggled in these certain areas that, like you said, conventionally, and of course, luckily I was good in other areas. So a little
mhm.
bit offset it where they're like, how can she have an A in anatomy and not be able to spell? And it's just like, ta-da.
Well, and so you're getting to, I have a lot of thoughts about this. We could have a whole nother podcast about just that. But the people I tend to work with tend to be millennials or Gen X, my generation, which doesn't exist. When they list out generations, they always forget Generation X because we just didn't exist because we raised ourselves because we were little feral children or whatever. And a lot of the people I work with are breaking out of that shell now. You talked about early intervention, and I think that's amazing. And also, those of us who are adults who maybe didn't give ourselves permission to be artists, we get to do it now then. Did you have something you wanted to create? Create it. So I want to go back before we run out of time. So you've made these little art pieces and you're framing them and doing all this stuff. At what point did you start selling them?
Well, on accident, they started selling on Instagram.
Mm,
And I had sold a handful. My first sale, I had already had inquiries from strangers, but my first actual sale was to a woman here on Maui. She bought 3 little surfers for her son, who's a surfer. And that was my first, like, oh my God, I sold a painting. This is so wild. And then, this is in getting back to the people on Instagram. And then it was my boyfriend at the time and a really good friend of mine are like, you have to do this. Like, you need to sell them. And I was 100% reluctant, like, beyond reluctant. Let's go with resistant. I had no interest. I don't know. I was scared. I thought it was weird. I was just like, I don't know. And I had gifted the woman that did my hair, I had gifted her for her birthday this little painting in a frame. And it was a 2 by 3 framed in a bigger frame. And I got an email. It was kind of like the deadline before this art show that I could either order everything and sign up and do it or not do it. And I think my deadline was the following day. And I was still, my boyfriend's like, you have to do this. Like, I will come with you. I will buy the crap for you to do it. Like, what is it going to take? Bless him. And I got an email from this woman saying, I saw one of your tiny paintings and I'm absolutely obsessed with your work. I'm opening a new store and I would be really honored to carry your work. And I was like, that does feel like a sign. I
Sign
don't
that
know.
smacks you upside the head.
Yeah. And so I emailed her back and was like, thank you so much. I'm so honored that you would be honored. And like, yeah, I mean, I guess we're doing this. And Now, keep in mind, I had already scanned everything I'd painted so far. I had taken
Wow.
them into the printer. I don't even know why, because I wasn't planning on selling them, but I was like, let's go ahead and just scan these.
Mm,
Apparently, there was some part of me that was thinking ahead.
mm.
But basically, that email made me sign up for the art show. And the first one was a little bit rough. Although the very first person that walked up to my table that I spoke to bought a piece. So it was like
Wow.
my very first conversation was a sale. But
Nice.
then there was no sales for the rest of the day. So then I did the next show, I think was a week later,
Yeah.
and I had a bunch of sales. That was like the end of November. And then I did all of December. And then when I looked at December's numbers, I realized I had made more in the month of December selling tiny paintings than I had for any specific month of my interior design business.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I thought, it's enthusiasm, it's novelty. This is not going to continue, obviously.
Mhm.
And I've kind of been telling myself that every month since.
So what do people love about your work? What do they tell you?
I think that, I mean, anybody who likes tiny things is automatically obsessed. But I think people that don't care about tiny things, I think there is something about having to really slow down and actually look. And I have magnifying glasses, like vintage pretty ones on my table for people to view the work and steady this magnifier over it. I think in this day and age, even when you're in Maui, you're still everybody's kind of going, going, going. And this
Mhm.
is a moment to pause and to
Mm.
really take it in. And I think like, you're walking by a painting that's 6 by 4 feet wide, you don't really need to slow down or to spend much time to really visually take in what that is. Now, yes, obviously, if art touches you could stand there for 12 hours and stare at it.
Mhm.
But if you're walking through a lobby, you could just glance at something and keep going. Where I think my pieces invite you to stop and slow down and savor that moment, even if it's just a brief moment.
And, if I may say, it's also I think the fact that it's Maui, it's not just any place that you're doing this. These are little bits of Maui, and Maui is a place where you slow down. There is so much beauty there. Before we started recording, you flipped around the computer so I could take a look at the mountain outside your window. I mean, it's lush, it's gorgeous, and so it's also like you're taking home. I came back to Minnesota and it rained for 3 days straight. Like, Minnesota spring, and I'm like, "Why is Minnesota" I love Minnesota, but why is Minnesota not Maui, right? Like, it's this little bit of this heavenly place, like, there's something really special about the place itself that lends itself to
Yes.
what you're doing.
And I think that that's a huge part of it. And I actually, because I am capturing Maui landscapes, and so it's
Mhm,
taking a little piece of paradise home. I get emails probably at least once a month from people saying, "I bought a tiny painting from you in 2022, and it sits on my desk, and it makes me smile every single day." And it brings me a little bit of joy. It reminds me of Maui. It reminds me of why I'm working, which is to buy plane tickets back to Maui.
mhm,
And I think that I think one of the big things that I actually didn't touch on is that they they spark joy. Like
mhm.
in Marie Kondo herself, there is something, especially that little reveal of all the frames. Like I've had grown women squeal because they're so stinking cute and get so excited. And I think that they're happy little paintings for the most part. Even though some of them were produced with so much anxiety, they're still like really happy little paintings.
Can I just ask you, because you reminded me of something, which is that we are living through serious times. So, especially in serious times, we're recording this in April 2025. Why is your cute little painting why is art, why is creation so important it feels, I mean, I know because I talk to people all the time who want to write, and they're always like, "Oh, but it's so frivolous." Why is it the opposite of frivolous in your opinion?
I think it's crucial.
Mhm,
And I think that it's the art of creating, whether it's sitting down with a pen and paper or sitting down with a computer typing or doodling, painting, sculpting. There's something that happens when you let that creativity out in whatever avenue it wants to come out in. There's a connection. And I think that that's why people love art so much is that we put some of ourselves into that work, whatever form it is. And I
mm.
think people connect with that and resonate with that. And I think it's wholly therapeutic. I encourage people constantly to paint or draw or write or do whatever. It's one of my favorite things is talking to kids that are like, I mean, I paint, but I'm not an artist. And I think there's a Picasso quote. It might not be Picasso, but it basically says we're all born artists. We just get told that we're not over the years and we stop.
Those are gifts that you have in this lifetime. Claim them
Yes,
because they're not nothing, they're everything,
I
you know?
think so. And I think they help people. And I think it's easy to be insecure. In fact, I have a friend who's a brilliant artist, and I want her to share her work. And it's so powerful. And she's been sharing these paintings with me for a couple years as they're unfolding. And I know she submitted one piece to an art show a couple years ago. So
Mhm.
I thought she had been sharing these freely. And the other day I was like, "Oh my gosh, I think this is my favorite piece of yours." And she was like, "Thank you so much. You're the only person I share these with."
Oof.
And I'm like, "Oh my god, the world deserves to see these." Like I was like, I almost feel like you're being selfish
Mhm,
by not sharing them. Like
mhm.
I don't want to shame you into doing it, but I also want to shame you into doing it. Like these are too beautiful for you to just keep to yourself.
And I think the benefit of somebody like you who has taken a chance to make this beautiful stuff and it's turned out for you and it's inspiring and beautiful, that you can turn and look at somebody else's work and see the beauty in it is really transformative because you have faith and you're handing off not just your artwork, but you're also handing off a little bit of your faith to other people so that they feel confident that they actually could create that art and they actually could share and that there is value in this thing that they've been taught to hide away and be ashamed of.
I think it's a weird thing. And I don't know if maybe it's like you said, we're kind of Gen Xers. I don't know if there is maybe not even so much our generation, but the one before, it was like the 50s and, the 40s, 30s. That's like, get to work,
Mhm.
unless you're like a sign maker. We don't really care if you're artistic. Like, we don't need that right now. I know so many people that I've found out they're artists after years of knowing them. Seeing an
Mm.
amazing painting on their wall and being like, oh my God, that's beautiful. And they're like, oh, I did that. And I'm like, what?
My grandpa was a sign painter. That's why
Really?
I think yeah, he was a sign painter and he had, in fact, I wanna show you right now. Here's the ruler that my grandpa used to give out to people. He has a little ruler, and behind me, I have a little sign that he made. And I think that's what I'm saying, like the example of, oh, that's a thing you can do. You can be a sign painter. You can. Did he make tons of money? No, it was before the internet. He worked his tail off. He was very poor, but he did what he wanted to do, and I'm prouder of him than if he had been the CEO of a big corporation because he really, really followed his art. I value that, you know?
I think it's huge. And I think the more that we follow it, the more, like you said, we kind of give people permission to do the same.
I just really want to underline this because I think this is so important. Oftentimes, the things we say we're never going to do are exactly where our most golden gifts lie, right? Golden shadow. It's the thing, but we're like, no, 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 can't. And I'm scared and I might screw up the sky.
And watercolor's hard. It's very unforgiving.
Mhm,
But it's like there was something about that, something about the unforgiving nature of it combined with the tininess that I think I almost needed that level of focus to kind of shut everything else out.
mhm. So, if people go to your website, they can see all of this.
Yes, I have a limited collection of prints on my website, soon to be more. But they can get an idea of the scale and the detail.
And that website is?
tinyartmaui.com.
Okay, you heard it. Go see it. And then, okay, my cat is.
The cat approves.
The cat approves. Go see it and then maybe think about not only you're going to want to get one of these. You should probably buy one of Corinne's paintings. And then you should go out and figure out what it is you want to create.
Yes, amen.
Thanks for listening to Courageous Wordsmith. Today's episode featured Corinne Bauer of Tiny Art Maui. You can read more about her and check out her links in the show notes. That's where you'll find my links too. Backstage at Courageous Wordsmith, our production team is the brilliant Brooke Roy and me, Amy Hallberg. You can subscribe to this podcast right on this page. Sign up for my emails and share with friends who want to write. And how about you? You have stories to tell. What if you let yourself tell them? What would that look like for you? I am Amy Hallberg, and until we meet again, travel safely.